not.
All right, we're live.
So we're going to be taking up the capital bill next, H493. And I see Dan Dickerson's here. Dan, as you can imagine, we are not going to go through this line by line and vet every two. I'm sorry. I don't need to minimize your work, but
I'm okay with that.
if you want to go through also, I know that there's a combination of bonding as well as straight appropriations. And I know that there was some discussion around the level of funding in the Senate versus the House for water sewer projects because of bonding that was approved at town meeting. So if you want to give us sort of the highlights, obviously you were here. No, you were not here, but the chair was here, and Senator Harrison, when we were talking about art in state buildings. So we did a trip down memory lane on that and see the 75,000 here. So if you want to just give us sort of the what you would see as the high points of this year's capital bill, and anything that you want to point out that our committee might have looked at somewhat differently, but I suspect oftentimes the differences are relatively minor. So let's start, and then people can ask questions as we go through.
Okay, Dan Dickerson with Joint Fiscal. You should have the big capital bill spreadsheet in front of you. At a very high level, this is the first year where the institutions committees have been able to sort of make decisions on how to use the bonded dollars that are recommended for the two-year budget process, which for this two-year process, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee recommended borrowing $108 million, which is down from the previous 2 years when it was about $121 million. So there is a pressure there. The upside is that this is the first year where the committees have had access to a cash fund to help offset some of the loss of bonding power due to the recommendation from the Affordability Advisory Committee. So this spreadsheet is broken up into two pieces. The first 3 pages are really the projects that will be paid for using bonded dollars, borrowed money, and then the 4th page is the list of projects that have been authorized by the institutions committees to be paid for from the cash, what's currently known as the Capital Expenditure Cash Fund, although the big bill is making those appropriations, and the cash fund name will probably be something completely different once the conference committee gets done with it. So I'll just call it the cash fund for now. So.
No, we like our name. We're not giving it up.
Okay.
And not only that, it's actually looking at that fund to have greater the utility than simply relative to the capital bill. There's money there that has been earmarked for the match for transportation, and then there probably can be some general fund related needs over time. So it actually is really kind of envisioning the ability to have that resource in a much more flexible way. But it does add a different connection, because you've been around long enough. We've never paid a whole lot of attention to the capital bill, but this capital bill now is 39 million of general fund. And before it used to be all just bonded dollars, and we picked up the debt service. And so now the question really becomes that we're putting money into the capital bill or into our cash fund, and we're trying to reduce the level of bonded. Then it's similar to what concept we used in pensions, and that is the avoided debt service frees up money to avoid the bonding. So it's kind of using it as a replacement as opposed to additive. But this is a whole different way of looking at the capital bill than we've ever done historically.
It certainly brings a lot of complexity to it. It really does. It used to be plug and play, and
it's, it brings some.
Now you have to deal with us.
Well, that's fine. If we hadn't dealt with you, we probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish as much as we did, so we're very thankful.
So let's keep going then.
So, so going back to the,
We're on the big sheet.
On the big sheet.
yeah, going back to the first page, I know there are a couple of new members to Appropriations, although you've probably seen this on the Senate floor before, but I'll just really quickly go through the layout. So the far left column is the line number. So if I refer to a specific line number, that's where you would refer to. And then the section number. So if you want to compare what's in the spreadsheet to the bill, I've referenced the section numbers in the Senate institutions version of this legislation. Then there's the project description. And then there are these groupings of columns with numbers. The first is what the governor had recommended. The second is what the House had recommended, and the boxes shaded in red are where the House differed from the governor. And then the next group is what your Senate Institutions Committee is recommending, and the green shaded boxes are where they have differed from the House. And then you see on a numbers basis what the cumulative total differences are for various areas. So
When you're talking about, let's look at line 19, 20, and so forth, move to cash. The House used in bonded money.
yes, the House for these projects. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering because you had the same amount of general fund, 39 million. So I was just wondering, well, so I'm just saying, what got moved?
Yes.
To free up moving that to the cash.
Sure. So there was a strategic objective to moving these three projects down to cash, and that is when the governor had proposed his capital bill. Historically, and this, I don't think this goes back forever and ever, but at least for the past few bienniums, further in the capital bill, and you see this in the spreadsheet, there's usually a line item for UVM, and then there's a line item for Vermont State Colleges, and they get roughly equal amounts of money for their major maintenance. And in this capital bill, what the governor had done is, for UVM, it was the typical sort of line item in bonded dollars, and then for the state colleges, he had proposed them receiving money strictly through cash and in 1 year. And so what we did is take, and he had proposed 10 million of cash for VSC. The House cut it to 9. The Senate Institutions Committee stuck with 9, but they took 3 million of that, brought it back up into bonded, broke it out over 2 years, which is what they had usually done, left 6 million in cash. And for that, we had to move about 3 million of bonded dollar items down to cash to make that even. And so that's why these items were moved on lines 19, 20, and 21.
So they would show up in.
Yeah, they'll show up in cash.
Or the cash fund section T. That's when you say cash, you mean the cash fund.
Yeah. So if you want to go to page 4, you'll see I've noted lines 172, 174, 175 are those projects showing back up again. And then you'll see line 187 where at least on the cash fund component of what state college is receiving, that dropped from 9 to 6 in FY24, but that's because 3 million is shifted up to bond. So for most of these agencies, BGS manages the projects. BGS gets some appropriations to itself, and then there are others where the appropriations go to an agency, but BGS is managing the work. And if you ask me to explain what the difference is, I wouldn't be able to. That's what I'd have to refer to Becky on. But just so you're aware, and then A&R, UVM, Vermont State Colleges, if you're on page 2, they manage projects. One big item I just want to point out under HS line 29. This is where the capital bill is beginning to put money aside for the Women's Correctional and Reentry Facility. I don't know when exactly construction will begin. I think BGS is still looking for a final site, but I think you'll see this show up over the next probably the next few bienniums of putting money together and then finally construction beginning and going out the door. But it's going to be a fairly expensive project. And so this is the first big sort of slug of money that's being put aside for
And you're
that.
referring to line 29?
Yeah, 20. That's probably the biggest single expenditure in the capital.
Is there an
budget.
estimated total cost of that?
I think it's in the, I've got it on a spreadsheet in my bag. I can get it out.
No, I was just wondering,
It's definitely in the high tens of millions, probably around.
this is.
I thought it was 47, but I don't know if I can see if I can find it.
Oh, that sounds cheap.
Yeah,
I mean,
Cheap?
Burlington High School is gonna be 200 million.
No, they got it
Well,
down
that's
to
deconstruction and construction.
Yeah, that's removing the materials, but 175.
Now, that has been the source of a lot of emails that we've received, that we shouldn't be building
Yeah.
a women's prison, although everybody who's been there said it really is in need of replacement, and looking to the main model for a replacement, which would be more of a re-entry focus.
I got it.
All right, Senator Starr.
Before you get off page one, up in number 15. We've got 3-acre parcel stormwater. And we've got 1.3 million, 1.25 million, 1.25 million. That must be something pretty special, a 3-acre parcel to.
the 3-acre rule.
Yeah, there, as part of Act 64, which passed in 2015, that was the Big Clean Water Bill. They created this process for landowners that had parcels with a cumulative area, cumulative impervious area of 3 acres or more, to apply to the state for a permit for those 3 acres. And then, I think a part of that permitting process is sort of creating a timeline and a plan for how to mitigate some of the runoff from those properties. And so this is where BGS would be receiving spending authority for state properties to be.
But it's a lot more than one project.
Oh, it would be, I think, statewide.
Yeah, these states for
It says it's a statewide.
So I would think between all the property, parking lots, roofs, we must have acres.
That,
Yeah.
that makes sense. But it says for 3-acre parcel.
It says statewide just before it, statewide.
Yeah, maybe I'll correct this to say 3-acre impervious, just so it's.
And then, the other question is on 22.
What line?
22.
Oh, 22.
The Newport Courthouse. I don't know if Russ.
Yeah, so we had, talking with that, we have another 550, I believe, someplace else to go and find a spot and to purchase and to buy. And so they just couldn't use the 750 at this point in time, because they haven't even identified a site yet. And so they had the 750 in there. They had 1.25 million, I believe, in there. They just couldn't use that much more money. And so we took that monies and appropriated elsewhere within the bill, because it was just gonna sit there. And they just didn't even have a timeline yet as far as where, what their desire is to find a place in Newport to build this courthouse. But it was just money that was gonna sit there and more than likely be there for 2 or 3 more years and not be used. And so we had bonded for it, so we figured we probably better put someplace else. So that's why.
I just wanted to double check that it wasn't the hole in the ground that was made from the JP deal, because they don't really want it.
I know that they had negotiated on that hole, but as being, as you're very well aware, being up there, Newport's really kind of sensitive about putting a building in that place without having tax revenue on some of the best real estate that they have. And so we've asked them kind of I have behind the scenes, I know you have behind the scenes a little bit to try to find a spot. That's gonna be less impactful to the grand list of the city. So, but bottom line is, the reason why that 750 is not there anymore is because of, they just really didn't have a need for it. They weren't ready for that monies. It was bonded monies.
And
we
that's
had other.
something the House put in, the governor did not
Right,
recommend.
exactly. And so it was monies that we ended up appropriating elsewhere.
Other questions? Usually people look at what's in their district. Senator Berkeley.
I have a question on the Department of Corrections. So I assume lines 27 and 29 are just the same. The wording is a little bit different about HVAC, and one's in 1 year, one's the next fiscal year, but I assume it's all the same things. That's just the wording is just, it happens to be a little different. Or one includes planning and design and the other one.
Yeah, I think between 27 and 30, I think 27 is primarily planning, design, sort of figuring out what the needs are at the facilities, and then 30 is where they can just begin
The next year.
implementing to the extent that they can.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad to see HVAC work.
Are they
whenever-
talking about actually, because our centers are unbearably hot places in the summer. Are they talking about actually putting air conditioning in some of the correctional facilities? I mean, I can imagine what it's like being, they're like saunas, and if they're at maximum capacity, I'm sure it adds to kind of the tension and the, difficulty. So it's up a long-term plan.
I think that's a possibility, but I think BGS is sort of exploring
have
whether
windows
to
that
do
are
the full-on
open.
HVAC or whether there are areas that could have.
They don't like
heat
open
pumps.
windows, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right.
But I had another question on that
Okay.
section.
Wait a minute, Becky has a.
There's the sort of long-term evaluation of the issue, but there is language that says that they can use the amount appropriated if they identify these sort of spaces immediately and in common rooms, break rooms, that need to have something installed right away.
So, Senator Personally, you know.
On the women's correctional facilities, that 13 million, because I've heard the chair of judiciary talk about how a new prison needs to be built, but it doesn't need to be as big. And so I don't know if by approving this dollar amount, or is it still just all preliminary, or are we agreeing to some policy on the size of the prison?
Unfortunately, the House Corrections Institution, I think, has put that into a different bill. And I'm trying to figure out what they're,
Different from this.
yeah,
Well, there's 13 million here.
13
I
minutes,
know,
don't get you
that
too far, though.
won't get you very far. But they want to do another study, and I think that's where my disagreement comes in.
We've been
We've
studying
been
this.
studying this.
Yeah.
It's gonna take 5 years to get a new prison. We need a new prison. We ought to get off the dime and start, if this starts the planning and starts the construction of the new prison, then I'm fine with it. But I will say again, we have done a disservice to the women who are incarcerated in Vermont and the victims of those crimes by diddling for 5 years over and studying.
It's been
what it
longer
should
than
be.
that.
No, it's longer than 5 years.
Yeah, it's longer
It's
than
at least 10
Yeah, I can
years.
only remember.
I had a press
I didn't
conference
take
about
privilege
this 10 years ago.
today.
It's, so.
It's been a long time, and it's
Yeah.
sort of like,
10
is
years,
this,
you think?
uh,
Okay, I'll change my argument to 10 years, but the point remains the same. We know the system that we want to build is similar to Maine, with a high security, small, high security wing, and a wing that allows people to possibly work release or whatever and not be in such high.
And a place to learn skills.
Is that your
and a place to
understanding
make
of what they're
a family.
planning to do?
No, it isn't because they're studying. Maybe I'm wrong.
so,
Can I ask?
wait, just a minute.
Okay.
Could every response to Senator Sears on the go to 7 lines? Becky, do you want to?
Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. In section 26 of the bill, there is a requirement that BGS submit a site location proposal for both the women's correctional facility and the reentry facility. And the idea is
What?
whether reentry and correctional
Oh, yeah.
facility, and whether So there's some preferences about looking at state-owned property and whether they should be co-located at the same location or be looking at separate locations. So there is a requirement that they start looking at a site for these facilities.
Well, but they also have to have detention spaces, because about half the women are detained, right?
Right, so it's looking at the two facilities, both the sort of secured facility and then the reentry facility.
Yeah, but
And I think the question is whether they're. at the
My
same-
objection is to continue to study. Let's put it at St. Albans. Let's do the job and let's get it started, because we know what we want. It should be all on the same campus, can be in separate buildings. But the smaller the facility, the harder, the more staff it takes. And we should probably be together, but they can look at that. But we should get off the dime and put this into place right now. I don't know why we would wait. I know where the place was gonna end up. You're gonna have a juvenile facility there, you're gonna have the women's facility.
So I'm having a hard time taking this with what we do with the capital bill here.
I think it's fine.
And then I'm gonna go to Center Alliance, and then we can come back.
I'm equally frustrated as Senator Sears with the process, because not this process, I think it looks like there's a step forward here. Design intent, when BGS comes back, how much of the appropriation that's here is actually required for the replacement planning and design, and how much of this money is actually gonna be used for the planning and design for alternative.
So what does the 13 million do?
Yes, and it has both collating facilities and the need for separate facilities. So it seems to me that we're gonna get back maybe two separate designs, one together, one separate. And then will the administration be identifying a preference for one or the other? I saw you there. Can I ask John Brown that question?
You can. I want to go back to Senator Sears' comment. The way in which our current community correctional facilities are designed are very staff intensive, just because of the way they are, and the pods and so forth. So I do think the part of this is designing facilities where we're also looking at the staffing requirements that go with them. And as recently as the psychiatric hospital, we had them designed in such a way that the nursing staff couldn't see the rooms, and there was great concern about patient safety. And we ended up installing mirrors or something. So I think what you're hearing here is the frustration about how many studies, how long it's taken, the extent to which designs have really adequately reflected the needs of the population. And then we end up, trying to figure something out after the fact. So if, for example, it says here, we're gonna study both, whether they should be co-locating both facilities. And the question is, do we need to study that? Maybe that's part of what you're saying.
That's part of it.
Well, I just want to know, I was looking at Sean Brown when I asked the question, and Becky has her hand up, so.
Yeah,
So, but I do want to finish the question.
go ahead.
I was just gonna make the point that it's not necessarily a study about looking at the co-location and separate facilities, but when they're looking for a site location, they have to determine if that location can house separate facilities, or it has to be a campus style approach, or whether they need two different sites. So I think the site location informs the design of how they move forward.
Okay.
So, all right, you want to ask?
I would
Sean?
say that the 13 million here in bonded dollars is set aside for construction, future construction. There is also 1.5 million in cash fund further down in the spreadsheet.
Line 180.
At line
On the back,
180,
yeah.
180 helps fund current planning and design work. The state's current goal here is to place and site this facility. And I say facility because the current thinking is it would be one facility, it would share some services, and one portion would be the reentry, and then the other portion would be the more correctional center. And our goal is to try to find existing state-owned land to place it on in one location. Yes. And there is a stakeholder group that's been put together by Corrections that is starting to do the work to move this project forward with that intensive planning. No decisions have been made on bed capacity on either component. That's the work of the stakeholder group. So no decisions have been finalized, but we share the urgency here. And that's why you'll see money set aside, because we'd like to move it forward in the next few bienniums, but we know it's going to be very expensive.
So when we get the information back, will it be an engineering design? Will we see that? Or is that something that comes next?
Well, I have a question. I have not on that one. I probably,
So
Sorry.
can I ask Senator
Well,
Mills?
Yes, you may. Is your question about the engineering?
No, it's about the previous question. I think you want to comment on.
well, no, I was gonna actually say about I was gonna actually add that there was 1.5 in the bonded section, I mean, the cash section, to make sure that if they found the site, they could move immediately and move towards buying the land and moving forward. But I do want to say, there was several, probably 4 or 5 points that were put in by on the House side about BGS and reporting and pushing, and we took out all of them except for this section right here. We as a committee were very, as Senator Sears correctly said, you know, we're doing a disservice to these women in this facilities where they're at, and I think you and I had a conversation as well. And the only part of this bill where we're really pushing BGS is on this section right here to move this thing forward. We want to know how it's going. Do you have a site yet? Are you ready to move forward? Because we really do feel strongly that we are doing a disservice. We have the monies, we have a general framework of what we want to get to. There are still some discussions to be had about what we're going to do. But we need, as Senator Sears correctly said, we need to break some ground here. We need to move forward. And so that's one part of the bill where we're pushing hard. We're pushing BGS hard to get us to that point so we can start getting further along in our discussions on what we're going to do, but get there.
You've got monthly status reports.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
Does
and then,
that go in all to the Justice Oversight Committee?
Should. We should actually.
We might-
language in
well,
there.
wait, to
Both
submit, maybe we need to look at the language. It says requires BGS to submit monthly, but it doesn't say to whom. So is it to institutions or is it justice oversight? Do you know that, Dan? Well, Becky, do you know the answer to that?
Well, the site location proposal is going to House Committee on Corrections and Institutions and Senate Committee on Institutions, and the monthly status reports would go to those committees as well.
So Dave, are you suggesting they should go to the oversight, justice oversight?
In the off-season.
Yeah, I would think so,
Yeah,
because they're meeting.
yeah.
Yeah, we had to approve the design money originally.
Well, I guess you're hearing sort of a decade of frustration about how long it's taken to get moving on this.
The money is set aside in the cash fund, so there wouldn't be an approval necessarily off session.
No, just the update.
Just the
right, the feet to the fire part of it, and we're very committed to that.
Okay,
Did we put 250 shovels
and a backhoe?
backhoe in the budget?
I think so. So what we're doing is setting aside 13 million of bonding capacity to go with maybe a third of what we think would be the construction cost. At some point, did somebody say 45, 50
I thought I
million?
saw it, I tried to find it, Senator, but it'd probably be beyond what we would have had in the capital bill, but I thought we had it in some notes. So I'd hate to rest my figure on that number, but I was going from memory, which is dangerous.
Okay.
So right now, in addition to, the governor had asked for 14 million in FY '25 originally bonded dollars. The House dropped that slightly, and that was to help pay for the HVAC study and some of that implementation. The administration had estimated between FY '26 and '28 need of another, it's like 52 million for build out.
That's in addition to the 14?
Yeah, so it's more like 70, yeah.
But you don't know how big it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of an estimate until a site is determined, site is found, and then they figure out whether that's going to be a larger campus or whether it's going to be broken out into locations. So yeah, that could go up or potentially go down.
Senator Wilson.
The next one down from the Women's Correctional Facility, the 1 million for short-term secure stabilization facility. Where's that?
Or are you on the back page? I think this is another place where a site hadn't yet been identified, but I have to.
Can I get a little more background to that? That's not very much. I'm not really sure what we're talking about.
So I think it's for help with the need for a youth facility.
Wasn't that, Dan, where they were talking about setting up the pods for the,
We have money in the budget for the temporary.
9 million, don't we?
No, that's for the
That's-
inpatient
That's the
psychiatric.
inpatient psych.
But we do have money for the, I thought the temporary 8-bed facility. So, so I was just wondering, Senator Weston, I think, is probably thinking about that other pot of money and what this is
Oh,
for.
we've got, so some background of what this would do would be great.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can certainly get back to you with it.
So when we were putting the capital bill together, it was a concept at that point of where, of this short-term facility, the urgent need of it. And so this was to help jumpstart, that process. There is more of a defined plan now of the pods and looking at the facility up in St. Albans. And those additional funds that are in the budget would also be needed given the anticipated.
So this is
cost.
additive to that?
Yeah.
So it would be helpful if we had some sort of a whole picture of what this was, and not just in the budget here, particularly as we're looking at the conference committee on the budget, where these bump up against each other.
we had a briefing on that by the Commissioner of VGS. And it was very extensive as far as where it was, Senator Westman, but we can get back to you more in depth what that conversation was. It made a lot of perfect sense when she was sitting there in front of us, and I just don't have the recollection, recall of where it was. Yep.
Yeah,
I hear you.
this is like, we've got money in the budget,
Right.
we've got this over here, and we're now in the conference committee on the budget.
Yep.
So what's the picture?
Right, we'll get that for you.
Okay.
So one other, I guess, well, if there are any other HSDS related questions, I can try to take those, or otherwise I'm gonna move on to clean water, which is the other area that I wanted to stop on. This is on page 2 of the spreadsheet, section 10. And there's there's some interplay between this section and the cash fund. But I want to first stop on this section. So the Senate Institutions Committee heard testimony that there's roughly for all the municipal pollution or projects out there that would be eligible for municipal pollution control grants, the administration had tallied about 14 to 16 million of need if we were to award the total grants that could be awarded based on the statutory framework for how those are actually, I think it's like up to 35% of 30 to 35% of project costs. So the governor's budget for municipal pollution control grants had recommended 10 million of one-time general fund to pay for some of that, to put against some of that need in FY24. The House in its budget / capital bill had given 4 million of that. And the reason I went down is that is what the Clean Water Board had originally recommended in its budget process, or they had recommended about 3.3 million, which is the usual annual appropriation for that. So they went back towards that, although they went a little bit higher. What the Senate Institutions Committee has heard over the past several weeks is that municipalities would like to get more money through those grants to help offset the costs for pollution control projects. And so what the Senate Institutions Committee had done here in section 10 is between lines 85 and 91, they moved some of the money that had been set aside for clean water in FY24, or 25, and they moved that forward to FY24 to provide some additional funding for municipal pollution control grants. So you'll see on line 85, 4 million that is appropriated in FY24, and that is in addition to the 4 million that will come out of the cash fund. So it's 8 million total, which gets closer to what the governor had originally recommended.
Where is that on the cash fund?
Line 190.
Yeah, I see it.
So what this does create in FY25 is it creates a gap.
You're advancing money from 25.
Right, typically the capital bill funds about 10 to 11 million for clean water per year. What the language in the capital bill does is ask the Clean Water Board to consider whether the Clean Water Fund could, basically cover the cost for municipal pollution control grants in FY25 to fill that gap, because there is a little bit of addition of bottom line money in the Clean Water Fund. Although, I don't think the administration can come back and propose filling that gap from elsewhere, or maybe finding bonded dollars to fill that gap. But currently, FY25 would only have 6 million for clean water in the capital bill. So we are helping municipalities in FY24.
And our thinking was to move those dollars into FY24. Is that I think that some of the decisions have been made by the House before town meeting day. And so we actually got the spreadsheet of a lot of these projects that people went at town meeting and got their projects approved. And we were really, really nervous about these communities, like Colchester. They really, really battled for a long, long time to protect 3 miles of their shoreline. And they were really kind of one of the biggest takers of that pot of money. We were really, really nervous about having to make those phone calls of these communities that have worked for 30 years sometimes to put these projects together, and just to get a phone call and say, hey, thank you for all your hard work, but hey, we just don't have the money for you now that we told you 6 months ago that we had. And so we thought it was very, very important to get those projects up off the ground, get them moving again, where we had promised the money. I hate to use the word promise, but we had said that the monies were available to them. And so we feel a little bit better about getting closer to the $10 million figure versus the $4 million figure that the House left us with. And then working with Dan.
So how did you net out then?
Yeah,
house, the governor started with 10, the House went down to 4,
right.
and you were able to advance, and so you ended up at,
And it,
what,
8.
8?
and it wasn't just stealing monies from the, you know, from
No,
Apple.
you were just advancing it. and the-
Well, we had some pretty good assurances working with Dan that probably there was a way to backfill that money in 2025. Maybe it wasn't exactly how it needed to happen, but I
Well,
was
it's all
pretty,
fungible, it's just a matter of.
I was
what
all
it is,
comfortable
and
that probably those projects that were slated could probably, we could probably get there and get them going down the path.
So your line on the capital and essential investments, then you came in at, what, 100,000 higher than the house?
Yes, so that is
What line?
because,
The bottom line, back page.
yeah, so she's looking at line 202 where the House in FY '24 had 39,385,000 for of cash fund authorization, and the Senate Institutions Committee is at 100,000 higher. And that is because of the this is a part of the IIJA match for clean water, drinking water. We, on the House side, we had documentation from the
So it's
administration.
9.7 to 9.8 is where.
Yeah, they've broken out what their estimated need was to meet that match for FY '24, '25, '26, '27.
I thought it
Once-
actually was going down from 9.7, but it went up, huh?
It went up because the federal government sent updated numbers for what it would be pushing out to states. I think this was probably sometime in March. And so the administration had better information once the bill reached Senate institutions, and they said, you know, we actually need about $100,000 more to have the right match for FY '24, which is fiscal '23, I believe. And so that is, that's why it's 100,000 higher of cash. And that was reflected in the big bill that you introduced.
Other questions or?
I did have a question, staying on the clean water. This is in the cash fund, so it's line 188. Is that related to what you were just saying?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I will say the governor in his budget asked for 27 million for FY '24 through '27. And based on documentation we received from A&R, we realized that the legislature had already appropriated 2.7 million of that in FY '23. So the actual need for the 4-year period was about 24.3 million. So 9.8 of that will be appropriated in the big
That's
bill
what I
and
was
will cover
thinking,
FY '24, 25. And then the big bill also sets aside 14.5 million that could be appropriated in a future year that would cover FY '26 and
Well,
'27.
that was 320 million of federal dollars.
Right.
So.
So that's not like the list that you would.
Yeah, that's the list that I've given you, and where the House didn't have that money's protected, they wanted to make, they were willing to take the chance later on to see if we could come up with the funds of that. And working with your chair, we thought it was pretty important that we had the money now, find a way to make sure that we can leverage those funds so we didn't have to worry about it. That and, yeah, so that was the short answer to a long question.
No, that makes sense. And then I thought I saw that the Waterbury Dam was not being funded, but I guess I was just reading it wrong, because now it is.
It is, seems to be on 189.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That, whose district is that?
I don't know, I just care about dam safety.
I see.
It's in Woodbridge.
The embassy.
Around somewhere.
Well, you can see we're looking, everybody looks at, it's like transportation projects. The ones are in my.
Yeah, that's the anthem.
Okay. Any other highlights, Dan, as we're going through, we've kind of skipped all around on you.
so I think you touched on the big ones. There is some policy language in the bill. I would happily, if you want to hear about some of that, I would defer to Becky to go through. But as far as the numbers, I think we've gotten to the big ones.
I do have a question on line 49. and bonding for regional economic development grant programs. Can you tell us what those grants are? I assume they're for capital projects or?
Yeah, these are all supposed to be for capital projects, but these building community grants, I think they're administered by a few agencies. I believe that ACCD administers a few of them, AHS administers a few of them.
I know certainly the barn and the cultural facilities are by ACCD, so. And historic preservations would be as well.
I believe the regional economic development is also an ACCD program.
What about the walleyes?
They're in here. I
They're
saw
in
them.
there, yeah.
They're there.
They're in there. 25,000,
25,000.
50,000 for the biennium for the bill. You have 25 and 25. They're in there.
And how are the walleyes doing?
They're doing great. It's just it's an amazing,
It must be.
amazing program.
Oh,
Is it always the Senate to add it in?
There's also underwater.
I see that.
Last year, we gave
Archaeology.
them, Senator Percival, we gave them a little bit more because they had lost their ability to fundraise during the, during the pandemic, but they were, they were very, very respectful. And they came this year and said if we could just do what we historically had done, that they could get by with what they.
Have any other varieties come forward to say we need funding?
Yeah,
What
it's
about
always
brook trout or
No,
lake trout or perch? Or I guess walleye is a perch. Yeah.
They were pretty well have been taken care of. But,
Yeah, they have a good lobby.
I
Yeah.
guess.
Walleye have a good lobby.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I do have,
Hook,
well,
line, and sinker.
on line 72, that's the same program that Senator Starr was talking about up top, right? It's basically-
Yeah, this is a 3-acre rule compliance within
Forest Park.
A&R Holden. I think it's mostly Forest Parks and Rec. It is Forest Parks.
And
and Rec.
above it was just for somebody else, but it's the same thing.
And there's actually sort of two pieces to that. It's their overall, it's sort of their major maintenance, but then also they can use it for 3-acre rule compliance.
I still haven't figured out, but I can walk in that size. If you're a farmer, you'd stay away from that and let it drain it, when it gets too full, it would run off. I don't know what they do to make that a better wetlands. You can't go in there with any equipment.
Yeah, well, this doesn't have to be a wetland.
No.
This could just be this is impervious surface.
Yeah, and this is all sort of legacy 3-acre impervious, so it's existing that is now brought into the permit process. I think after Act 64 passed, any new, impervious that was over, I think it started at 3 acres and now it's 1.5 acres or.
Well, I'm glad to see you've got committee room chairs for $2,006. That wasn't
Which
the
could that-
governor's recommend, you'll probably
that's-
veto the bill.
Is that just the institutions committee?
No, it says line 151, I don't know, committee room chair, sergeant at arms.
So the House Institutions Committee goes through this very entertaining process called
Sure.
the REBO committee process, where they look at all past appropriations and I get to send emails to all the agencies saying, hey, for all this money that's still out there, where are you at on this? And so we usually find, or the committee usually finds some money that's been appropriated that isn't being spent fast enough, or the administration says we're not going to be able to spend this.
I hope they spend a lot of time on line 146 for $219.
Not a whole lot of time. This is a subcommittee, so they don't have the whole
What
committee.
our committee would agree.
What's residents' care fund?
Vermont Vets Homes.
That's all of that.
Oh, so this is, I will touch on this really fast. So the House Institutions Committee identified a decent amount of funding, either appropriated to BGS to spend on behalf of the Vets Home, or money appropriated to the Vets Home that had been out for a long time, meaning they appropriated years and years ago, still hasn't been spent. So instead of pulling the money back completely and bringing it to the bottom line for anything, what they did was repackage those appropriations, and you'll see on lines, lines 117 and 120, where they are now reappropriating those funds, but they're directing BGS and the Vets Home to report back in a year on the process of getting those funds out the door. So they didn't want to pull the funding away completely, but they wanted to sort of light the fire under the feet of those responsible for the improvements in Vets Home.
Okay, everything's okay.
So they did pull the money back, but they are appropriating.
I
reappropriating.
gather our Senate committee concurred. with the-
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
All right, yes, Senator, what's
Right, in section 9.92 on forest parks and recreation, is there a list of the projects?
I think they did submit some testimony to that effect, and I can forward you what the institutions committees received.
What line were you in, 70?
76.
Well, it's 76 and then you have backup in 73.
Oh, but those access roads have been a real issue, the condition of them.
Yes, I
Yeah.
understand
Seems
that.
like one of them's in your district.
Yeah, more than that.
I'll send you the
And
documentation for
there's a couple
forest
of
parks.
observations around parking lots and such.
All right. Other questions?
I'm wondering about the lab at, the agricultural lab.
And the one, the heat source for,
Yeah, I mean, that building.
I thought there was funding to address that.
There is, that's on.
Yeah, there's 1.5 million in FY '25.
And that would replace
That's
and
one
get
option.
their own separate heating system, I think was, because it was shared with VTC and it wasn't working properly. And so their request is to have their own heating system for that lab.
It's gonna cost over $1 million.
That is what has been requested by the administration and what House and Senate institutions have heard with.
It's also a system that they use to sterilize their lab equipment in addition to heating their lab. So it's a multi-purpose system.
Oh, it's more than heating.
Yes, something they use to sterilize the lab equipment.
Other comments? And Stephanie, all of this, we had crosswalked and anticipated when we did the budget, so I think we should all set in terms of making sure the money all aligns. And, unless there's anything further, I can entertain a motion, remove the bill favorably. Senator Starr, and then a second by Senator Lyons. I swear they've turned down the heat in here.
I know, they did.
Driving us.
I think they turned that down outside.
It's not been turned up, I don't think, the last few weeks.
Yeah.
I know, it's just really crummy spring.
Oh, that's you again, Senator Birchlick, you're BGS.
Yes.
Uh-huh. That's supposed to.
But it's pretty easy if we don't do it, we just say just over.
Yeah, and then we've already anticipated what is being proposed in the budget. that we just passed.
Miss validating.
It's kind of a cut and dry deal.
Well, it would be nice to make progress on the women's facility, that's for sure.
Senator Cruz,
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Birchall.
Yes.
Aye.
Senator Starr,
Yes.
Westman, yes. Senator Birchall.
Yes. And the reporter would be Senator Birchlick. So I think we have completed our business for today. We've got a lot of bills though.
6.
Well, that's in addition to the ones that we still have to get through. Six that got-
Stacking.
Well, today, if you listened from the podium, the bills all came to either
Yeah.
Finance are here, so thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. I want to thank the Senate Appropriations for the hard work. We started out with $62 million in cash and that quickly dwindled. And then before it was all said and done, with the help of the chair and your committee, we pulled back about 58 million to make sure that this bill was a great success. And we appreciate all the hard work you did very much.
Thank you. Okay, so committee, I think we have nothing that we can do between now and
Nothing we
4.
can't do.
We can do?
Nothing we can't do.
Well, there's nothing we can do, sorry.
No, I think that's, but it's more
Oh,
aspirational if we say there's nothing we can't.
Oh, all right. Well, I'm thinking that we have done everything that can possibly do. And we have our committee of conference in here at 4.
So chairs is over.
Chairs is next door.
Cheers.
So I'm going to adjourn the committee for this